and be serious about climate. Like, we shouldn't be privatizing Hydro One. We should be democratizing it so that communities can control over their. You can't have structural racism unchallenged in society and be serious about climate. You know, I was in Paris, and Catherine McKenna, as the new Environment and Climate Change Minister for Canada, was in the heat of the negotiations. And the French government, who was running the Paris climate talks, specifically enlisted her to go into the sessions around temperature targets and fight for the 1.5 degrees target. And it's important that it's in the climate deal. And Canada played an instrumental role in putting it there. You can't do that and then not have a climate plan which actually has a specific concrete proposal for how Canada is going to do its fair share of reducing emissions as a rich company with massive historical responsibility. You can't do that. Because under the 2 degree target, the great 50-50 coin flip, right, about whether there'll be runaway climate change, there's no coin flip for Southern Africa in the 2 degree scenario, right? There's no coin flip for Pacific Islands. There's not even the 50% chance. In the 2 degree scenario, large parts of coastal society and low-lying island states and places in the global south will be uninhabitable or be very, very difficult to sustain life. So the 1.5 is a beacon of literal survival for important populations around the Earth. And we have no right to dangle that in front of the world as a rich country like Canada and not do our fair share of emissions reductions. And that means massive radical change. Yeah. Structural racism has to be addressed head on. The Temporary Foreign Workers Program, as Gabriel so eloquently put, is structural racism in our food system. Yeah. The agricultural workers who are making the food, the significant proportion of the food that we eat, do not have rights that are anywhere commensurate with basic standards of human rights and what everyone else in Canadian society enjoys. We can't have a racist food system and do something about climate change. And finally, we can't have structural inequality and be serious about the climate. We have immense concentration of wealth in our society, and unfortunately, it happens to be aligned perfectly with those people who don't want to do anything about the climate crisis, right? We know that the oil companies are a major barrier to change. We know that Exxon knew from its own science in the 1970s what was happening, and yet they funded decades of climate denial, and in the biggest and most important economy in the world in those decades in the United States, they effectively blocked any meaningful climate action. And to this day, with the Republican denialism that controls a huge part of the American political system, the fossil fuel industry has banked heavily against our future survival. And it's reflected in the deep inequality, economic inequality that we have. One stat. Since 1988, which was kind of the watershed moment for climate, when James Hansen, the legendary climate scientist, testified before the US Congress and said for the first time in that place, and to a global audience really, we know climate change is happening, we know humans are responsible, the greenhouse effect is real. You know, at least the American political class lost all plausible deniability around the climate crisis at that moment in 1988. Since 1988, the top 2 oil companies in the world, Chevron and Exxon, have made $930 billion in profits since 1988. So the 2/3 of historic emissions over the last 250 years can be traced to 90 companies. And the top 2 are Chevron and Exxon. They've made almost $1 trillion in the period when we've known that the climate crisis is real and that we're causing it. So that's the kind of concentrated economic power that we're facing. And we have to be honest about the fact that inequality in society, inequality in our economy is directly linked to the power of fossil fuels and to the power of those interests. And we have to be brave about taking them on. So that's, briefly, I think the challenge for us in these climate consultations is to expand the frame, not be climate wonks, Although that's tempting. The climate walk next to me is agreeing, very passionately. We can't allow this silo to stop us from busting out and connecting the dots right across society. This panel is a living example of the kind of alliances that we need, the kind of movements that we need to build, and the kind of connections that we need to make for the minister's benefit when she comes to our town. We have to make these connections. Thank you.